Table, and at the far side we have Poultry Hamlet from the Union Solidarity International. It's a South African trade union in Glasgow. The leader loves whisky, wine, running and the great outdoors. Walton did an MA in Industrial Relations at Ruskin, Oxford, and is interested in how trade unions use technology to organise. In the middle we've got Nigel Flanagan from Union Global Union. He works for Union Global Union for the past 3 years. He's worked in Africa, India, Europe, Sri Lanka as a senior organiser. Nigel previously was a lay activist within UNISON and a regional organiser with UNISON also, but his downside is the Leeds United quarter.
That would be perfect.
And then next to myself, we've got Dave Spooner from the Global Labour Institute. Dave is the co-director of the Global Labour Institute and has recently been appointed as director of the Union Solidarity International. Dave's background is in trade union education, specialising in international trade union organisations. He's previously worked for UNITE as an international coordinator and international organising department, and was the general secretary of the International Federation of Associations. He's got extensive experience of working overseas with a variety of unions and labour and service organisations. So I'm going to hand over to David firstly.
Thank you very much. It's very odd because I have to explain who Global Labour Institute is, even though we are based here in Manchester. There are a few international labour organisations with our offices here, just in the Royal Exchange down the road. So it's great to actually be talking on our home turf, as it were. We're a small organisation supported by unions, almost exclusively funded by trade union activities. We don't get grants, or we're not part of an institution, university, whatever. But we service the trade union movement nationally and internationally around international trade union questions. Most people have heard us up in this country, I think, because of our work in political education, I suppose, and primarily our annual summer school, which we hold each year in Northern College, some of you may know, Barnsley, where each year we bring 100 or so trade unionists from 30 or more countries to talk about what's the politics of the trade union in global terms. It's a big space where people can just openly talk about politics in terms of trade union. And you can find out more about that on our website. We also run projects. We work very closely with some of the global union federations, and in particular at the moment we're doing work with the International Transport Workers Federation in support of organising what we call informal transport workers around the world, particularly in Colombia, in Nepal, which is a big deal at the moment, of course, in Niger, in Africa, in Uganda, and in the Philippines. We've also recently been doing some work around the trade union development in the Arab states. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. Just very briefly, I think we've got about 10 minutes each, is that right? I want to talk about our bread and butter work, which is really around education on what we call organising in the global economy. And we've been doing this for many years actually with unions, particularly my own union, UNITE, or Transport and General Workers Union as was. And here, these are courses for senior shop stewards, conveners, reps and workplaces to talk about how do you, as a trade unionist in an industrial sense, how do you organise internationally? And a typical course will look at what is happening with the companies, what's happening to employers, what's happening to capital and capitalism, which we're looking at particular employers, particularly transnational corporations, and trying to understand what they are thinking, when they sit around in the boardroom strategizing, what are they thinking about? What directions are they trying to move? And we're looking at the impact of course, the banking crisis and so on, and what some people call new capitalism, with the rise of the hedge funds or the private equity companies. Companies like Blackstone, who employ thousands and thousands of workers all over the world, but hardly anybody heard of them because they are a private equity firm that simply buys up and sells other companies and always refuses to acknowledge that it is an employer, even though it is around the world. The whole of those corporations, particularly in some of the sectors we work in, like construction and food and transport, these employers are increasingly looking simply at short-term profit and how to squeeze the maximum amount in a very short space of time. And the way they do that is by making us and our work and the workers who work for their lives more and more precarious. So we all know the recipe, I suppose, of short-term contracts, more temporary work, the 0 hours contracts and outsourcing. All of these things are pushed by this process which we call financialization of corporations around the world. We also try to introduce how workers in the same company or in the same sector, how they are coping with the same problems in other parts of the world. Now, in the old days, when we had lots of money from the old Department for International Development under Labour, at the beginning of the airline period, we used to get money to actually fly people in from countries around the world, bring workers in from the same companies, from the same sectors and so on, to be able to participate in those courses with the British trade unionists, to give them a real sense of that. We don't have those resources anymore. What we do have is Skype. And we do have the technology. So we now increasingly use those technologies to bring those people directly into the classroom, as it were, to be able to engage with the shop stewards here in this country. And to try and formulate a sense of what the trade unions in a company or in a sector worldwide have a commonality. And what is it? Is there a common strategy? And how could they work together? Most importantly, how can they organise? Now there's two ways, and we'll hear more about this, I think, certainly when we hear about Union's work. There's two ways of doing this. One is, in effect, creating direct linkages between the unions here and the unions in other countries who are working in the same sector or particularly the same company. Now, in the bad old days, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, this sort of activity was regarded as being really, really dangerous. The trade unions the trade union hierarchies did not like this whatsoever, particularly if you were dealing with unions who may have the wrong political characteristics, as would be perceived from this country and elsewhere. But certainly beginning in the car industry in the 80s and so on, there began to be this idea of international shop steward combine. So you have people at workplace level working together from different countries to try and work as an international organisation rather than simply local or national. Now these days, we don't have those sort of restrictions anymore politically, and we can really move in terms of using some of the technology that Paul will be talking about, in terms of building those international grassroots, workplace to workplace linkages. And not only when you're in dispute. I mean, the classic problem would be, you have a strike going, or your plant is being threatened with imposed, or whatever it might be, and you think, oh my God, we need support, we need solidarity. So you go out and try and find people elsewhere within this country and overseas to try and help you. But by the time you've done that, it's normally too late. What we're now encouraging is that people should do it now, immediately, when the going is good, right? Not when you're in crisis. So you build those relationships with other unions in other countries, while, in the good times, so that you know each other, not only know each other's politics and the industrial system, but their pets' names, which football club they support, and you actually get to know them properly. So when you really get a crisis, you can really move quickly in terms of coordinating activity. And the other way of doing it, of course, is through the global union federations. Now, I'm going to steal Nigel's fire.
No, you go ahead, yeah.
But we are all, as trade unionists, we are all members of one or more global union federations. So you pay your union dues each month or week, whatever it might be, and a little tiny bit of that goes to the international federation that your union is part of. So if you're a member of UNISON, you are a member of the Public Services International, which is the global union federation for public sector's workers. If I am in the food industry in my own union, Unite, I am a member of the International Union of Food Workers. If I'm a bus driver, I am a member of the International Transport Workers Federation. But most workers, and actually most shop stewards, have no idea that they're part of these organisations. Often they've never heard of them before. Yet they are representing you at an international level. They are the people who are attempting to help you organise internationally. Now these organisations, 20, 30, 40 years ago, were largely, at worst, I'm going to be critical, at worst they were General Secretary's dining class, right? Where your top General Secretary would go for dinner in Geneva, a grand old time and so on and so forth, right? Better than that, a lot of them were, if you like, telephone exchanges, where, you know, a General Secretary wants to, of UNISON, wants to talk to the General Secretary of a public service union in Argentina. He will go to Public Services International, and they will pass through the messages. They will also help in terms of translation and so on and so forth. So it was literally like a little secretariat, and they were literally called International Trade Secretariats at one point. These secretariats would just be there to do this technical job of linking together. But of course, over the last couple of decades or more, the economy has changed incredibly, completely. And nearly all of us, in one way or another, are working in an international environment. Even those of us in the public sector, with privatisation and so on and so forth. Who do you think is, the companies that are coming in to try and take the jobs away? These are big global corporations. So all of us are being affected in one way or another internationally. And the global union federations have had to transform themselves from being either a dinner club for general secretaries or a sort of telephone exchange into real organisations. They are there to help us organise internationally. So you can either, in fact normally what you should do is both. You try and make sure that you are linking your workplace directly with workplaces in other countries, but with the help and through the global union federations, whom these days largely will actually assist you doing that rather than trying to stop you from doing so. But this new role of internationalism for trade unions, and I'm talking about the industrial side, has to make us think again about our own international work, about our own national international committees, our own local international committees. So what does the International Department of UNITE do? What does the International Department of UNISON do? What does the International Officer of RMT do? Those of us who've got big enough resources who have local international committees, what do we do? And it seems to me that in addition to the fantastic work we know that we all do internationally, the international solidarity work, the emergency work in supporting sort of humanitarian work, disasters affecting workers in places like Nepal, for example. Fantastic, that has to be maintained. But I think there's a new role that we all need to be thinking about, is how do we help the workers and the shop stewards in our own areas and our own unions connect internationally? And does our own international departments and our own international committees really do the job of facilitating those real industrial linkages that we need to make? Also, I have to say that these organisations internationally, like UNI, they are democratic. They have, just like our own federations, they meet every 4 years. We get to nominate our delegates who go there. They have a vote. And we need to be putting on them the responsibility for doing more to support us organising effectively internationally. And I was very interested, was John still in the room? Where's he gone? John Hillary, for example, was talking about TTIP, and he mentioned how frustrated he was that the European TUC, which again is part of the structures that we're all part of, is in favour of TTIP, or is certainly not opposing TTIP. So we need to be, through our own structures, challenging some of those decisions, and making sure that our delegates go there armed, knowing what the issues are, and be able to argue for the positions that our members have supported. So taking seriously those as democratic organisations that we have the right to be participating fully in. A lot of what I've been saying is very much what we talk about at our summits. about how do we do that? How do we engage our members in our unions more fully in the international work of the trade union movement on a global scale? Okay, that's enough. Thank you very much. I've probably spoken too long.
Yeah. What we'll do, we'll move through over to Walton, because I'll flow through, and then we'll do questions at the end. So, Walton,
Okay, so my name is Walton, and I work for Union Solidarity International, and we have a close relationship with the Global Labour Institute because Dave happens to be the director of USI as well as GLI, which we think is actually quite a nice synergy, to use it in a very popular word. What USI does, the main thing we do is we run this website, which covers trade union news and campaigning from around the world. So there's a lot of UK union news on there. Every day we have news stories up about what's happening with unions in the world, and we also have opinion pieces and action. And we are all over social media as well. So we have a very active Facebook page and Twitter, and we're on Google Plus and Instagram and all the other social networks. We do that, and we also do training in how to use new media for political organising. The main purpose of what we're trying to do is make trade union internationalism something that is really accessible to ordinary people. Because Dave has spoken a bit about what the structure of the international union movement is. Nigel's going to speak even more specifically, I think, about his own global union. A lot of ordinary workers don't know how this stuff works and how it fits in together, how they can get involved, and how they can be kept informed. What we're trying to do is use new media, social media, to make it as easy as possible for workers to make direct links with each other, with people in other countries. The other thing that we're trying to do is connect social movements to trade unions. So there are a lot of people out there in wider society, in the world generally, who care very passionately about a number of issues, and it could be TTIP in Palestine that we've spoken about today. It could be really hating the way big corporations generally are bulldozing their way across communities and essentially taking control of the world. What a lot of those people don't realize is that trade unions are probably the most effective way to resist those things. I mean, we all know the situation unions have found themselves in, having been beaten back ever since the mid-80s. A lot of people have forgotten that trade unions are really effective sites to fight neoliberalism. So we're also reaching those people, so not directly a trade union audience, not always directly a trade union issue, but trying to show people how trade unions are a really, really good way at fighting back and resisting corporations. And one of the main lessons that we've learned from running this website and from reporting on news stories, labor news stories around the world, is a very simple one, but a very important one that a lot of people don't realize. And that is, if you fight back, you can win. It's absolutely the case. We don't always hear about it because the news doesn't report very well on labour struggles around the world. And even in our own campaigning, we often forget about the victories. We get this kind of outrage or activist fatigue because there's one crisis after another. We rush to support a crisis. As soon as that crisis is over, we rush to the next one without actually remembering and reflecting on and celebrating the victory that we've had. One of the things that I've been really privileged to be able to experience over the past few years is watching all these struggles emerging and gathering strength and being able to pick up people and pull them behind a particular principle and an idea and begin to win. And they just very, very quickly I'll give you just one example, though there are many, and that is the fast food workers. I don't know if any of you have followed the fast food workers' struggles, but it started about 2 years ago when a group of McDonald's workers in New York walked out of their McDonald's shop and essentially started trying to organize for decent wages and decent conditions in fast food restaurants in the US. They got a lot of support from the SEIU, which is a big service union and affiliate of Uni Global in the US, who put real money into trying to organize a fast food campaign. That campaign grew really, really big, and they linked in with something called Fight for 15, which is a fight for a $15 an hour minimum wage, which is really ambitious because it's a 100% increase on the federal minimum wage in the US. and they managed, often using new technology, to connect with fast food workers in other countries as well. Last year they had their first Fast Food Global, which was a day of action against fast food companies. People took part from 33 different countries, and they were able to share their experiences on social media of what it felt like, often for the first time, to walk out of a shop and to join a picket line, and to realize that there were people across the world taking the same kind of action. At the same time as they're doing this, in each country they're applying political pressure around similar demands, but they're a bit different because the situations in the countries are different. The second Global Day of Action was a couple of weeks ago, and this time there was a lot of action in the UK for the first time with the Bakers Union. We're heavily involved. In most cities across the UK there was action outside McDonald's and other fast food restaurants. And the point is, they are beginning to win. Initially they were winning the argument in the US that workers who work hard, workers who work full-time should earn enough money to earn a decent living. And it's now turning into legislation where more and more cities are signing up to that minimum wage. So SeaTac, which is a small city, became the first one. Then the city of Seattle signed up to $15 an hour minimum wage. Then San Francisco, and the movement is just growing and moving. And that is a massive victory, because that's a huge amount of money moving out of bosses' pockets into the pockets of working people. And it's due to a campaign run by some of the most precarious workers in the US, people who are historically very, very difficult to organize, who've actually managed to put that kind of political pressure on local government level to get that minimum wage passed and increase the power of working people. Over in New Zealand, there's a union called Unite, no relation to the one in the UK, who've been organising in fast food restaurants as well. They've just defeated 0 hours contracts, which is a phenomenal victory. And they've done that through collective bargaining. So in the US, they haven't actually managed to sign collective agreements with those companies, largely because they're all franchises and it's been very, very difficult. In New Zealand, they've signed collective agreements with Burger King and McDonald's and Starbucks, and I can't remember all of them, but there's a chunk of fast food restaurants that they've signed collective agreements with, and they've managed to defeat 0 hours contracts, and with McDonald's get a 15 New Zealand dollar an hour minimum wage for workers there. People need to know this. It's important to know that if you fight back and if you join in solidarity with people around the world, support each other, you can begin to win people over, and you can change the tide, the economic and political tide that we're living in. And that's important for all our campaigns, whether it's TTIP or Palestine or a living wage or whatever it is that we're involved in. If you fight back, you stand together, you can win. People really need that message of hope and that message that that we need to stand up for ourselves, and that's what we try to do through running this website. We'll encourage you to visit it and to get involved, affiliate a union branch to us, and possibly go on one of our training courses as well. Thanks.
Okay, well, I'm really not going to take up my full 10 minutes at all, because first of all, Dave's done a great job for me. So if you took notes when Dave was talking, you'd have to listen to me. But I do want to introduce UNI to you, and I think the important thing I want you to remember about UNI Global Union is that Dave has described really, really well how these international global unions that were created 30, 40, 50 years ago have moved from being some kind of retirement club to now actually being frontline unions. And that the bulk of my work and the work of my colleagues working for UNI is involved in frontline work with organising campaigns in different parts of the world at strategic locations where we've mapped out the power of a global company and said we need to get a stranglehold on G4S, we need to win in Kenya. To get a stranglehold on Amazon, we've got to win in Germany. To get a stranglehold on Walmart, we need to win in the States. And that is really the essence of what we try to do now. UNI Global, the sectors it represents, you can see them on the website if you look up, but it's essentially property services, the security, the cleaners. The biggest sectors are telecommunication workers, which is call centres and engineering workers all over the world. And then we have the e-commerce and retail sector, which is why we've been so heavily involved in the Walmart campaign. We have what we call framework agreements with 50 global multinational companies. And they're not agreements that say, set out conditions of service and wages, etc. They're more about trade union rights to organise and trade union access to workers. Because in most parts of the world at the moment, our fight is to actually be able to create and build trade unions. And as a consequence of that, then fight for improved conditions. We have 22 million members, as Dave's explained, affiliated through the trade unions, and we represent about 900 trade unions around the world. Our last World Congress was in Cape Town in December of last year, at which the affiliated unions passed very, very strong motions on issues like TTIP and global organising. So it has that democratic structure and that democratic life. Partly our frustration and one of our aims is to increase and develop that democratic participation. So that unions in this in the UK who are affiliated to UniGlobal include UNISON because of the private sector taking over areas of public services, include Unite, include GMB, include the Communication Workers Union, and we want those unions to become more active. 80% of the funding of the work that Uni does around the world comes from Europe. And of that 80%, the bulk of it comes from the Nordic countries and from the German trade unions. So there is still a lot of work for Uni to do in terms of developing its affiliates, real cash and membership commitments to the work that we are doing. But to go back to this idea that we map out the company, we find its global weak points or its strategic important points to the company as a business, and quite literally we find a union on the ground to work with, and then we attack it. We don't pull punches, we don't ask for favours, we go to organise a powerful majority trade union in that workplace, in that country, in that company, to get a global framework agreement out of them so that we can then spread the trade union strength to other parts of that company. So one of the biggest group of, this is not being filmed at all, bastards we deal with is G4S. But it is one of the world's biggest companies. Security work is expanding. It's the largest company, the largest employer in the whole of Africa. It employs people on absolutely disgusting conditions in some African states. So we have to fight them by winning a global framework agreement, which they have signed with the aid of the GMB as the host union in the UK. But now we have to enforce that agreement around the world. So we know that in 90% of the countries where G4S employ people, they're not abiding by the terms. They don't let trade union activists talk to the workers and organise them and build a union. They victimise them, they fire them, they assault them. You know, it goes on, but at least we've got in our hands the global framework agreement, which gives us something to argue with them about and to get that access. And so that really sort of describes the effort we're making. If I just give you a couple of examples of sort of work that I am doing now because of my position, what I've got to do. A real target for UniGlobal is organising call centres. The call centre sector is growing in parts of the world, outsourced from Europe, not just to India. The country I'm working in at the moment is Morocco. 100,000 call centre workers in Morocco, all outsourced from France and Belgium. People in France, if they ring a call centre, they're not ringing somebody in France, they're ringing somebody in Morocco. There is no union in the call centre sector. Every 6 years, under the law they inherited from the French government, they elect workplace councils. And we are now working with the UMT union in Morocco to stand hundreds of candidates in that election on the 3rd of June and building an organising network around it. Now we think we're going to succeed. We think on the 3rd of June, those workers are going to elect hundreds of union delegates to be on the Workplace Council, which will give them a collective bargaining agreement. And that is, when we're talking about the good news we need to share, that's the kind of breakthrough that Uni, working with affiliated unions, is trying to achieve. I know all of you will know something about the Rana Plaza tragedy in Bangladesh. I mean, that is obscene, it's disgusting. By any stretch of the imagination, having thousands of workers in buildings that are on the verge of collapsing is shaking with the machinery and saying, no, stay at work, it collapses, 1,138 people are killed. What Uni has done, and when I say Uni, I always want to emphasise here, we don't do anything really on our own. Everything is done with affiliated unions. They provide the muscle, the power, the energy and everything. We try to just give something of a lead. But what we've done there is we were the ones who went with Industrial and the other global unions and said to the Western clothing companies, the Zaras, the Topshops, all these other companies, Benetton, we need to set up a compensation fund for the families of these victims. And we want $60 million US. Now we had to fight them to get them to put the money in that. We actually had to fight them tooth and nail. And it took a global campaign, joining together all the social movement networks and the other global trade unions to get the £60 million compensation fund set up. But even at the last minute, companies like Benetton were refusing to put money in. And it was only the pressure of social media and that global campaign that shamed them into putting the money there to compensate those families. But the hidden story of Rana Plaza is that the obvious way to prevent this happening again is, yes, we need to have factory inspections, that's got to be part of the new law, but you need active trade unions. With health and safety committees, with shop stewards, with delegated responsibilities and powers to make sure that those factories don't carry on being used. And now the Bangladeshi companies that are employing these workers are sacking trade unionists, are victimising them, are getting rid of them, even while the whole world is looking at Rana Plaza and saying what a terrible event that was. Even now they are victimising trade unions and trying to stop the Bangladeshi trade unions from building an effective power base inside that sector. So that is an area where the global unions will continue to work with the Bangladeshi unions to make sure we can stop that we can prevent that from happening. I think the last example I want to give you is a country where the anti-trade union laws and the activities of the government are so repressive, it's unbelievable. Everybody usually thinks of Colombia and Guatemala are places where it's dangerous to be a trade union, which it undoubtedly is. But within Europe, the worst place to be a trade unionist is Turkey. And we've been working on a campaign to organise workers inside the airports in Turkey. Some of the biggest airports in Europe, some of the biggest tourist destinations, all these major global companies like G4S and Securitas and ISS all employ people at those airports. We trained organisers, we put together a plan, we picked on the airports and said we're going to organise them. In response, the Turkish government sent in what they call the civil police. These are police who have no uniform and simply have essentially a baseball bat and a gun, and had just turned on the activists who were trying to build the union outside. 11 of them were arrested and kept in police stations for a week without any charge. And that is in the heart of Europe. That is being seen by G4S and all these nice Western companies who have pretty decent relationships with trade unions in Britain. So what we want to do to our affiliates is say to GMB and UNISON and UNISON, when you're in these little meeting rooms with these people, you need to tell them about Turkey. And you need to tell them that what happens in Turkey affects us here in Britain, because that's what trade union solidarity is about. And I have to say, by and large, my experience is the British unions are very, very good at doing that, and are very strong at doing that, but they need to be pressurised. And without organisations like these to put up the social pressure, there could be a backslide in there. Finally, UNI's next global conference is in Liverpool in 2018, right in the heart of the North West, the best city in the North West, not this place we're in now. Say that's a United spot. That's my popularity. But it does mean that the movement in the North West has got a great opportunity there to connect with 900 trade unions and over 2,000 delegates from all over the world. And I hope we do manage to plan something and arrange something for that year. Thank you very much for letting me speak. I'm very proud and privileged to be here with these two people, and I look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for the table?
Have you got any information or a website? Should I go on the website?
On Uni Global.
I've never heard of it. Oh yeah.
It's up there, Uni Global.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it breaks down into all the sectors and the campaigns and the various campaigns that were involved in. The Bangladesh Accord up there, and the Nepal earthquake appeal. But within the sectors, more detailed reports about industrial trade unionism and what the organising campaigns are that we're doing there. Our General Secretary, Philip Jennings, who's from Wales, has got 135,000 Twitter followers.
I thought you could say 135,000 suits.
We have. And one of them will fit him. So we do have a real significant global reach in terms of the affiliated unions.
I've got one comment and a question, or rather some experience. In the early first half of the noughties, I was involved in a campaign called North West. And our aim was precisely to link up the social movement and the British unions with trade unionists in struggle in less developed countries generally, and organise tours for people, for trade unionists from Indonesia, Mexico, Haiti, and some other countries, Egypt later on. And the experience we had was that those sorts of direct links, once you got the information about, who the people are and where you can find them, are quite easy to make with the technology that exists now. I mean, we were a sort of small campaign that could sort of directly go, for example, to the workers in Mexico, and been involved in a dispute with a firm that was supplying Nike, and invite them, establish a link and invite them to come to the UK. Now, I'm not saying it's always easy, because it's quite difficult sometimes to find who people are, and there has to be some degree of trust, obviously. But I think what you said, David, about how things have changed with the technology is right, that you don't any longer have to go through all of that bureaucracy. You can go directly to people. I think what we found more negatively is that sometimes those links are quite difficult to sustain over a longer period. The other thing that we did was to organise protests on outside embassies or companies when we heard disputes going on internationally. I'd like to ask a question which relates to the technology side of it. In the late noughties, there have been a number of experiments where unions tried to develop their own sort of niches within, for example, the Union Book as an alternative to Facebook, which was run, more democratically and without all the surveillance and so on. And those sorts of attempts seem generally to have failed. And so the question, I suppose, is how is the technology being used now? Is it using the generic technologies that everybody uses, like Facebook, Twitter, and so on? I mean, have the unions given up on attempts to sort of develop their own technology?
I think that's one for me. The idea of bespoke social networks is something that not just unions have tried to do, lots of other people have tried to do, running clubs or whatever the case is. And the universal experience is that people will not log into a specific network unless they have a really, really good reason. So your likes of Union Book end up only getting your absolutely most core, committed people who eat, sleep and drink trade unionism and like being online. So you get a really, really small demographic of people getting involved with something like that. So the technology definitely exists, and it's better than it was back in those days. But I think what we've realized is that we need to try to do two different things with technology. The one thing is to reach people and communicate, and the other thing is organize. And for reaching people and communicating, we need to use the existing standard social networks, Facebook and Twitter, and things like that. People know how to use them, they're on them anyway. Those companies are rich, they have lots of resources to pour into making the software really easy to use, user-friendly and all that kind of thing. So we use that kind of thing for publicizing and publicity. for our organising work, we need something that's a lot more secure. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a social network. We have a number of things at USI. We've got secure web conferencing, which allows sort of up to 25 people to do video conferencing around the world. We have multilingual audio conferencing, so you can speak to someone in another country with a different language. We have a network called the Organising Network, which functions like a social network, but it allows something like an international combine to make a proposal and vote on it. So, you know, that kind of technology does exist. We have software which is called constituent relationship management software, which is essentially highly sophisticated database software for connecting activists together. So all that stuff exists and it's in place, and we're trying to work with it and build on it and use that for organising and the other stuff for publicity. But trying to create union-specific social networks hasn't particularly ever taken off.
Yeah, I'd like to make another arising from your comments about Menlo Sway. You mentioned the problem of sustainability and how you maintain that. I think there's an important rule, which is that what I was talking about was both the idea of going directly, you know, making those direct links, workplace to workplace, branch to branch, whatever, not union to union, fantastic. However, I always advocate doing that in concert with the international organisations themselves. And there's three very important reasons. One is about politics. You know, sometimes unions will think, classically in this country, somebody goes on holiday, they go to a foreign country, they meet somebody who they find very inspiring, who's in a trade union in that country, and think, oh, that's fantastic, we want to form links with them, and they come back, and they can, with email and all that sort of stuff, they can create these links and support and so on. But they realise that the union that they've just supported is actually controlled by the employers, or controlled by a fascist party, or controlled by a businessman. You know, and this really does happen in many countries. And although, yes, absolutely, we should be encouraging activists to make those links, it's always important to check back with the organisations that really have that knowledge on the ground to say, is this a dodgy union? I mean, you know, normally they would be the people who say, actually go for it. You make this staff affiliate in this country, they're really good. These are the people who should be working with. These are the campaigns they're doing, and you can do it that way. The second thing is about sustainability, you know, particularly with what generally called NGOs, right? Social movement organisations who get very worked up about, understandably, right, a particular issue, whatever it might be, and they pour energy and money into making those links with a union somewhere else. 2 years, 3 years down the line, their priorities change, they go off the boil, they lose interest, and that just sinks. Where it's the unions and the structures of the international unions who maintain that day in, day out for years. And so it's again making sure that you're working with the international unions rather than completely separately. The third, and I think actually bizarrely is the most dangerous, which is that often we in the more wealthy West tend to have the danger of boiling down those relationships into fundraising. So you come across a union in India or Brazil or whatever it might be, Africa, and you think, great, we want to have a relationship with that union, they're fantastic, the rest of it. Before you know it, you're doing jumble sales, you're doing, you know, having meetings, you're raising money, and you're getting into a financial relationship with that union. And that can be extremely dangerous. I know, and I'm sure Nigel knows more than I do, but I know more examples of how money from Britain or America or where it might be has destroyed unions that have helped. If you take a little union in a place like, you know, Zambia, I know very well, you take a little construction workers union there, which probably has an annual budget of about $100 US, if they're lucky, right? And you put £2,000 into them, you'll destroy it. Because it's not sustainable. You're going to create problems in that union by doing that. Now that requires sophistication, it requires knowledge. And also, it's that danger of making relationships based on money and raising money. It's very dangerous. So all of these things, it's, although we absolutely want to get workers and unions and branches to make those connections and sustain those connections, it's working always with the structures internationally, which, as I said, are now bluntly our friends, not our obstacles, right, to make those relationships work properly. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, we've got time for one more question.
Oh, thanks. I'm going to stand up because I didn't hear the brother's question fully before, and I just want my voice to project a little. I'm interested in your views as to how these two particular international organisations can build links with civil society as well as obviously the union structures. You can see by looking at me that I'm beyond working age. I'm involved in local, regional and national pensions organisations. Here in the UK, my experience is that either that the National Pensioners Convention is nearly broke, you know, it's going to function at a deficit next year, and regionally, and I think our region is probably typical of others, we're very good at describing problems and not particularly good at motivating one another to get out and do something about those problems. Those are generalities. So I wonder how you feel that these two internet-based presences can help build appropriate linkages with civil society.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. And actually, I think that what we do is we try and include that with the principles of trade union organising now. That when we're training organisers or we're working with activists, we do place a significant emphasis on the need to find allies. And that the way we find allies is through the workforce. And that we ask the workforce, what do you belong to? What are you interested in? Who do you know? What do you think, you know, who would come and support us? And in that way of sort of building a network inside civic society around them, that really enhances and strengthens their trade union base. So I think that certainly the route now is the links with your wider network are more important than they ever used to be. That we do need to have all those different civil groups on our side to give support, especially in the case of where it's a union for workers who actually don't have that much industrial strength. So if we go to miners at a diamond mine, they've got immediate strength. If we go to care workers in South Africa, they don't have that strength. So linked with civil groups, with pensioners groups, users groups, with politicians, church groups, is a very important parts of Africa. They're extremely important, and we see that as part of the model of organising that we're trying to promote in the affiliate union.
Thank you everyone for coming to the meeting. I hope you're going to stay because we haven't got a Cuba meeting next and the ambassador for Cuba coming. I'd just like to invite you all to Nigeria and around and give you lots to think about. So thank you.